Australia is well positioned, and the key thing is that we remain open.
Don't waste a good crisis, and it has actually allowed us and forced us to ask questions.
Americans have never been more focused on Australia.
I think what's very important is that there's a great opportunity for both America and Australia to bring back manufacturing.
Technology ultimately has been the key to productivity growth.
Our land has seen the fabric of trading and exploration for thousands of years. Trade routes dart across the country. They were a central part of life for Aboriginal people, long before British settlement. Those routes allowed different groups across our country to share resources, information and culture, much like today. And this is part of the rich history that helped shape our nation. These days, trade is on a much more global scale. Australia grows its economy, employment and prosperity through trade with nations around the world. And these important relationships, spurred along during the Industrial Revolution, shaped modern Australia and keep shaping it today.
Americans have never been more focused on Australia. We were in Washington, D.C. for our AmCham Alliance Summit in June, and I noticed that on Capitol Hill in the White House, it's not really considered an important meeting unless there's an Australian in the room. We are really seen as key allies in the Indo-Pacific, and it's a very busy two-way street. Australia is not a country that just sits here in the Pacific waiting for America to send technology and information and people to Australia. Australia invests in America, sends people to America, exports great innovation to America. So we have a lot to offer to the United States in exchange for what they're offering to Australia. And that's something that's very respected and recognized a lot more now than it ever has been in the 20 years that I've been living here.
The relationship with Europe is so embedded in Australia. It really covers every aspect of Australia's economy, security, society, culturally, etc. I mean, one of the common misconceptions about it is it's somehow a legacy relationship. It's something that's deep-rooted, but it's in the past. In fact, nothing could be further than the truth. It really is future-facing, and it's something that we need to grasp hold of and actually maximise the benefits of that relationship.
That influence, you could say, is disproportionate. Australia represents just 1% of the world's economic output, yet we're the 12th largest global economy. Being an open, modern economy with a strong legal system and a reputation for innovation, it gives confidence to the biggest companies and countries around the world to establish operations here. And increasingly, as global travel and communication become an everyday part of doing business, Australians are taking their ideas to the world, where markets and investors' appetites are much bigger.
I don't think it's any coincidence that the pace of globalisation and trade had really slowed coming into 2019, and it was the worst year for global growth since the global financial crisis. And part of that was around the populism that you were seeing around trade and trade barriers. So we've got to be a leader, as we always have been, in terms of trade liberalisation, continuing to develop those relationships, continuing to look at economic cooperation, not just on trade, but on investment and broader opportunities to collaborate, whether that's in the defence or migration spaces as well. And it does come back to some of those countries that I talked about before, whether that's India, whether that's around the RCEP agreements, different things that are out there. There's a lot of agreements I think that we can continue to exploit and drive better relationships and better flows of investment, people and trade in the future.
Australia is well positioned, and the key thing is that we remain open to the best ideas that the world has to offer, whether that comes to us through the channel of investment by overseas companies, skilled migration, trade relationships, all of the ways in which Australia can learn and access those cutting-edge ideas from the frontier of the global economy.
One of my biggest realizations, particularly, as a SaaS company with a solution that can help small to medium businesses, not just the large enterprises, is, in Australia, there's 2.4 million SMB businesses. In the United States, it's 32.5 million. So just that size and scale, and then the proportion in the US of entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of startups, there's a lot of funding that supports them. So you've got lots of businesses competing for attention to the same kind of share of wallet in businesses.
I've definitely seen a growing understanding of software and digital technologies by Australians and by businesses. I think this is going to continue to change as the younger generation become more influential in the businesses that we work with. But it's definitely a shift that's occurring and has already started.
And that innovation takes on a range of ideas, from healthcare to mining and agriculture, space technology, and to the massive global investment to change the way energy is generated.
We know Australia has some of the most abundant renewable energy resources in the world. We have a lot of sun, we have a lot of wind, and we have a lot of space. And this is something that a lot of other large industrial economies would dream of. Now, with solar and wind energy now becoming some of the lowest cost sources of new electricity generation, there's an opportunity for new green production to become a source of competitiveness in a decarbonised global economy. Our work is showing that it's not necessarily a trade-off between reducing emissions and having a strong economy. While we find there are challenges, our work is showing that there are pathways to not only reduce emissions, but to also identify and to drive new opportunities in a decarbonised global economy. Earlier this year, we released a report on setting up industrial regions for net zero. And as part of that work, we looked at 5 of Australia's major industrial regions, Pilbara, Kwinana, Hunter, Illawarra and Gladstone. Across these regions, we found that there was a really huge concentration of heavy industry. In fact, it makes up around 16% of Australia's total emissions. So while these regions will be critical if we're going to reach net zero, we also find that there are substantial opportunities for those regions to decarbonise. It will require substantial investment, but that investment can unlock substantial workforce opportunities to support the transition that would be needed. Working with the companies as part of the Australian Industry Energy Transitions Initiative, we are seeing substantial momentum in companies globally and in Australia, and real investments are starting to be made. One example of major investment in the sort of giga-scale projects is the Australian Renewable Energy Hub in the Pilbara. And this is an investment that's looking to potentially export Australia's sunshine to the rest of the world and significantly advance the transition to a net zero global economy.
As the world fights climate change and takes a cleaner approach, there are even more changes needed. Looking at population growth, tackling congestion, and also recycling and energy generation.
We've always disliked waste, and we've always liked the idea of utilising all materials in a circular economy way because it's less wasteful. But I think the thing that we did in Australia, which is another great example of the alliance, is that we exported our Australian recycled paper mill technology to America, which was somewhat of a novelty over there, which tended to be dominated by the tree mill guys. And we exported our technology of recycled paper mills, number one, but number two, a recycled paper mill connected to a box factory. And that saved on freight, and it also created great machine density. And we were able to prove in America that with that technology of recycled paper mills that can use the most adulterated waste to make great paper and great boxes, is that you can be green and be affordable, and there's no green premium necessary. And so it goes in as waste and comes out as a box out the other end. And we were able to show in America that recycled boxes perform just as well as boxes made from trees. And so, as well as the fact that you can recycle a recycled box 10 times before it becomes sawdust. It was later on that Al Gore's movie came out, An Inconvenient Truth, that showed that reinforced that recycling is an important weapon against climate change. And that's because as things decay in the landfill, they emit methane gas, which is 85 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And so by diverting 5 million tonnes a year from landfill, we're able to make a substantial dent in the emission of greenhouse gases. In fact, landfills emit more CO2 emissions, or methane, than all of global aviation. And so we congratulate the Biden administration for leading the methane pledge, making the focus on reducing methane, and we congratulate the Albanese government for also recently making the pledge to reduce methane. And as I'm saying, landfills, which is what we divert waste from, emit a hell of a lot of methane as part of that. The first major innovation was to bring recycled paper mills at scale to the United States that can make much lighter weight paper that still works in a box and therefore reduce over packaging. That in itself was a major innovation. The second major innovation, which is more of an Australian phenomenon now, is that we've increased and these are 100% recycled paper mills obviously, but the second one is that we're now investing a lot of capital to drive up the recycled percentage of glass bottles from 30% to 70%, which requires a lot of technology. A third example is that we've invested to eliminate styrene, or as Americans say, styrofoam, in packaging and replace it with paper insulation. And a fourth example is that we're now making bubble wrap and stretch film out of 100% recycled plastic. So, getting rid of single-use plastics. So there's some examples where there's major investment leading to major innovations in sustainability and packaging. What's very important is that there's a great opportunity for both America and Australia to bring back manufacturing that had previously gone to other countries and to onshore. There was a lot of offshoring that existed, but now there's going to, for various reasons like COVID and supply chain bottlenecks, there'll be a lot of onshoring. And with that onshoring, things that are manufactured tend to often get put in a box. And so for us, that packaging dimension is a great opportunity. And then of course you've got the fact that, as we said, e-commerce is going to also mean, you used to take your book home from Barnes & Noble in a plastic bag, and now it gets shipped to you by Amazon or Walmart or whoever in a corrugated box. So, these are some of the reasons that we're so confident investing in America and in Australia, because of a lot of this onshoring that's going to happen and requiring more packaging that used to be produced in Asia or in Europe that will now be produced in America and Australia. Pratt Industries is proud to operate in both Australia and America, and the value of our investment in America is $15 billion, creating 11,000 well-paying American manufacturing jobs in America, so much so that we're the largest Australian employer in America at an average wage of $100,000 per person. I just made a $7.5 billion pledge to Ambassador Kennedy to invest the $7.5 billion to create 5,000 American jobs. I think the fact that they've sent someone of Ambassador Kennedy's standing to Canberra underlines how important the USA sees Australia, and it's a great compliment. As you know, Australia, great place to invest, just like America. Australia is a much smaller economy than America, so for Australian companies that are looking to invest outside of Australia, in our view, America has the best balance of growth, great growth, but with low sovereign risk. And that is the fundamental core reason why Australian companies looking to expand beyond our shores should look to America to invest. One of the benefits of it being a much bigger market is that you can focus on what may appear to be a narrow niche, like 100% recycled boxes, and build a big business, or 100% electric vehicles and build a big business. Whereas other countries, you wouldn't be able to rely on such a narrow niche a profitable narrow niche to justify a big business, but you can do that in America. So in America, once you have cracked the code, steady growth is forever, but you've got to be prepared to take those long-term views. The beauty of Australia is that the people are extremely great productivity. Workers in Australia are fantastic. Australia has very low sovereign risk. It's a very stable market. America has very good energy costs. People have a great work ethic there. And so I think that there are pros in both countries. And I really do think that whether you're, in America starting out in Australia or in Australia starting out in America, it's a matter of taking long-term views and knowing that both countries have the institutions to protect private property, which is becoming an increasing rarity these days.
Coming up.
The technology has definitely changed a lot in the last 10 years.
Autonomous is something that we've had an eye on for almost as long as we've been doing delivery.
The way you get your food delivered could soon be changing.
There's no doubt technology-related jobs will make up a large part of our future industries. The technology industry is growing at pace never seen before. And it's vital we support the growth of the technology sector, as we can't underestimate the positive impact from these emerging industries.
I think there's a lot of activity in support of technology in Australia, not just by the Australian Computer Society, but by our partners, other associations, industry associations, government and industry together are doing a number of activities to support technology. We only graduate around 5,000 people in IT roles. We need many, many more than that. And I think the government does recognise that. And I think industry is fast becoming aware of how scarce technology workers are. We're all working together to ensure that there's a good pipeline. The bigger the better.
Well, it's very important that both government invests in systems and schemes to increase the likelihood of people undertaking cybersecurity study. But as an organisation, for example, at CyberCX, we launched the CyberCX Academy. We're taking on 500 people over the next 3 years, training them in being a cybersecurity worker. If more businesses commit to doing the same thing and we have the right government incentives and schemes in place, then we can help reduce that gap between what the demand is, and there's an insatiable demand, and the ability of the Australian economy and workforce to react to that demand.
It's important for Australia, and it's something that I'm a really big believer. We've got to have competitive pricing and speed and processing, otherwise we have a disadvantage, and there's plenty of countries that have much faster and cheaper processing and access to data and technology than we do here in Australia. So I think that's one of the things that I think is important in this kind of levelling of what's been going on. But yeah, absolutely critical. We leverage it, like it's an important foundation. We're a SaaS technology solution company. It relies entirely on those platforms and the services that we rely on. We serve social search, where a lot of those social media platforms are based overseas. We're processing really large sets of data. So yeah, we're very dependent on technology and being good at using it.
Australia has always been geographically isolated, which has hindered our development, especially in products that haven't been in mining or agriculture. But technology right now is rapidly reducing that isolation. Australians, their ideas and skills can now be taken to the world. It's as true for people who make music or movies as it is for those who do business and are in technology. As our online connections and global supply chains improve, we can all be a part of the global economy in ways we never have been before. And it doesn't matter if you work in Dubbo or Adelaide, Toowoomba, Seymour or Darwin, your opportunity is as large as your imagination and your ability to sell it to the world.
So technology ultimately has been the key to productivity growth in the past, and I think that will continue into the future. I think digital technology has enormous potential because it's a technological wave that can actually drive productivity growth in a services-dominated economy. Manufacturing, mining, agriculture were often saw big productivity gains by replacing labour with capital on the production line, cheaper energy, a range of other innovations. The digital technologies are a very good fit for the services sector and have the scope to both reduce costs but improve quality across that sector. When you think about key examples, areas like education, for example, the ability of technology to step in and provide ways or avenues for children to learn directly, to be assessed, to save a bit of teacher time such that they're not necessarily marking papers but having some software that's doing that and helping guide students as to where they might need to focus a bit more attention. That frees the teacher up to be doing more things. You can see the same thing going on potentially in retail, where automation can free up a retail worker to be providing more service to a customer. In health, online interactions, potentially providing mechanisms by which clinicians can save on a bit of time but still be offering a very high quality service that's well tailored to the individual, maybe without the individual sitting in a waiting room for half an hour and wasting their time. So technology through a variety of mechanisms can be reducing the cost of services, it can be improving the quality of services. So I think it is key, and I think our ability to deploy that technology wisely, to adopt new business models based around technology will be very important. It's just important that we remain open to the best the world has to offer. And if we do that, Australia will remain at or close to the frontier in these service sectors.
We'd gone into Asia relatively early in Digivisor's history, and that has less reliance on bricks and mortar because, it was very much a mobile first, great bandwidth, a lot of businesses and the way people engaged were online. But we definitely saw that accelerate in the US and in the UK and EMEA where, that really changed the way those businesses were operating. And so a lot more went online and businesses where they were sharing their marketing spend. No longer could it be events driven, so it moved into more digital platforms, and then that created that opportunity. So I think it definitely accelerated our opportunity to look to those overseas markets and then just see that, even playing field, as you put it, to every aspect. Who are your suppliers? Who are your employees? Who are your customers? You can consider that more against the global opportunity than anything local.
In the sense that all of the technologies, even some flexible working and working from home, that was all in place before the pandemic hit. What the pandemic really did was clearly it supercharged the uptake of that, but it changed our mindsets about work being attached to a location. If I stood here and, asked you the question, 2.5 years ago before the pandemic, what's the purpose of the office? 95% of people say, well, that's where you go to do work. But the work, enforced isolation, remote working, showed us that a lot of the work that we used to do in the office is no longer relevant to be done in the office. We can see boosts in productivity for the individual. Working from home allows better deep thinking and focused work. It's better for individual task productivity. And so what we're seeing is that the pandemic has changed our mindset around work no longer necessarily being attached to a location, and that's the biggest change.
The availability of online conferencing totally changed the workplace during COVID. As a person who was part of that great lockdown, very substantial lockdown over 2 years in Melbourne, it was over 200 days where we weren't supposed to leave our homes for more than an hour a day. The ability to work from home, the increase in trust for workers to deliver strong projects and to still deliver value when they were not physically in the office, that has been a significant change to workers and the ability of workers to be seen to be performing without necessarily being physically present. It means also, again, for parent carers, that they can spread their work out from before official business hours, finish it off after business hours, and gives them significantly more freedom to still do the work they want to do without being hampered by the need to be physically present in a particular building.
As the sector continues to grow, it's important that Australia develops or imports the right people with the right skills to meet this demand for employment.
The great thing about technology jobs is that there's a lot of people in the population that are capable of working in technology. They just happen not to have a technological job at the moment. I think it's an agreement between not just the people that are capable of doing the technology, but the industries that could be employing them. And it's about encouraging people who might be in slightly different non-technical roles. Perhaps they're spreadsheeting experts, perhaps they're in health tech, perhaps they're in fintech. And encouraging people that are capable of doing technology work and suggesting that they could get a technology role. The great thing about technology, and speaking personally, is that it is very adaptive to people who have carer responsibilities. It's typically project work, and the project work is sort of stop-start. So I think it's a great role, a great job to be in. It needs to be promoted a lot more. Our ACS does what it can to promote it.
I think the key thing about projecting skills going forward is that there's a lot we don't know. We don't necessarily know what the precise jobs of the future will be. Many of them don't yet exist. So what's important is providing young students and school leavers with a strong grounding in the fundamentals, strong foundational skills that they can then apply in different ways across the workforce, potentially across many different sectors, many different careers over the course of their lifetime. I think there's going to be an increased importance associated with lifelong learning, so not only the acquisition of initial skills via a VET or a higher ed qualification, but that suite of targeted credentials, targeted learning, maybe informal learning that might be funded by the business, for example, to continue to build your own human capital, if you like, as you progress through the workforce. But I think some important things will be the combination of strong grounding in fundamentals, including literacy and numeracy and including the STEM disciplines, but then also the importance of those skills that are uniquely human, those things like judgment and critical decision making and empathy that's increasingly important in caring professions, social skills. It's in many ways the combination of those things, that the technical with that human or those social skills, that's going to be the winning combination going forward. So making sure that our education system and our system of lifelong learning is well geared to be providing people with that combination.
To encourage more young people to pursue tech-related jobs, it's really important that they see people that they can relate to working in these jobs from a young age. I think education has a massive impact on what students think they can be a part of. And we didn't have a huge tech scene in Australia until the last few years. So I think now that more students are more used to seeing companies like Canva and Atlassian and smaller startups as well, that'll go a long way in driving a lot more talent into the tech space in Australia in the next few years as they all start leaving university and school.
In economics, we always talk about spillovers and, essentially people interacting and benefits and ideas spreading. And technology has helped that to happen a lot quicker. And obviously, aviation has had a big part of that in terms of getting people together and building those relationships. But absolutely, Australian companies are now able to go to the world a lot easier than they have been in the past. And it's around the skills and the nature of the entrepreneurs and the leaders that we have in business in this country. They are best in class in a lot of sectors, and they've got those opportunities to grow. What we also want to do is make sure that we get some of that benefit back at home as well, making sure that we are training the next crop of leaders, building our management expertise, building that entrepreneurial expertise into other sectors, and continuing to grow the economy.
Australia has the potential to become a leader in the technology sector. This growth and opportunity allows our homegrown talent to shine on the global stage.
It's a pretty wild ride. I've been passionate in tech my entire life. I joined Uber about 6 years ago, which was driven on a mission for autonomy. I've spent the last 5 years in the Uber Australia business, and when this job came up, I just had to take it.
At a small warehouse in Los Angeles, Dean is playing an instrumental role in the collaboration of Serve Robotics and Uber as they work on the future of delivery. With enough charge for an 18-hour day, these robots are headed out on the streets of Los Angeles to fulfil as many food orders as is needed.
The relationship between Uber and Serve Robotics is a collaboration to deliver foods on the roads of West Hollywood. We've also got a relationship with Motional out in Santa Monica and newly announced with Neuro in Houston and Mountain View. So the technology has definitely changed a lot in the last 10 years, I'd say. Autonomous vehicles are definitely on the roads and doing deliveries, and certainly with these partnerships we are learning and continuing to develop as we go along. What Uber's doing now to learn is, in areas where the innovation is accepted and definitely more favourable to us learning and trial and fail, right, in each locale. So I think we'll learn, we'll take our learnings, we'll work with our partners to launch this technology elsewhere in the world. Like I said, probably a when, not an if.
Food delivery robots like Josie are just part of the plan as Uber looks forwards to an automated future.
I think we'll see this innovation take us in multiple different directions, I guess. I certainly see a supporting role from robots and autonomous vehicles on our platform, and how they cater to the overall reliability, affordability of our platform, but most importantly, how safety is improved on the platform as well. Safety is critically important. One person that doesn't die on our roads is definitely a win for everyone. For me personally, I subscribe to that safety message, and it's one that is close to home. I can see a future where my kids don't necessarily get a license themselves, and autonomy and human drivers are providing transportation.
With this technology already on the streets around the world, there's hopes that it could revolutionise business here in Australia.
Autonomous is something that we've had an eye on for almost as long as we've been doing delivery, and the reason for that is that the cost of delivery, which is partly borne by the customer but predominantly borne by the restaurants, is a real challenge. It's a real pain point for us. Typically, we, like most other restaurants, don't really make any money from those delivery sales. What we love about autonomous delivery is it has the potential to bring the cost of sale down significantly, and then we see it as having the potential to make delivery a no-cost sale, the same as a walk-in customer who's dining with us. We actually had some MBA students do a research project on autonomous delivery for us about 3 years ago now. We were at a crossroads in our strategic plan as to, do we keep investing in delivery, and we've invested a lot of time and energy in doing it well, or do we put a cap on it and invest in being a destination for customers? And on the basis that we're believers in autonomous delivery being the future, our business strategy went heavily towards that delivery part of what we do.
Food delivery was the lifeline for many hospitality businesses in the past few years, especially during COVID lockdowns. And for Eto in Melbourne, it gave them the lifeline they genuinely needed.
It was just absolutely critical, to the extent we were already doing a lot of delivery beforehand, but it increased significantly over that time, especially during the lockdowns. And what that meant was that we kept about 80% of our staff, and the flow onto our suppliers being able to keep ordering in significant volumes was the difference between being open now or going under. Massive. Hard to compare, but in the 6 years that delivery's been growing in Australia, store on store, we've sort of doubled our number of sales. So the number of people who are eating our food has gone through the roof. And our view of what we were doing, our concept, was always that we wanted to bring Italian to everyone, everywhere, whenever they wanted it. So delivery's been amazing to help us do that.
Coming up.
You don't waste a good crisis.
I think it's just accelerated everyone's use of digital and collaborative tools.
The work from home revolution, is it here to stay? As we faced one of the biggest health crises in our history, our supermarket shelves were quickly stripped bare.
We discourage the panic purchase of food and other supplies. I am seeking Australia's common sense cooperation with these very clear advisory positions. Stop doing it. It's ridiculous, it's un-Australian, and it must stop. And I would ask people to do the right thing by each other in getting a handle on these sorts of practices.
I just want one pack. No, not one pack.
Panic buying swept the nation, with supermarkets quickly placing purchase limits on key items.
The COVID-19 pandemic exposed some weaknesses in the supply chains, although it wasn't the only cause of that. There have been a number of things, a number of factors, global protectionist sentiment, geostrategic complications that have probably put greater strain on supply chains than we had experienced for a while. I think the key point is that although firms naturally are thinking harder about the security of their supply chains, in many cases they've moved from a just-in-time approach to a just-in-case approach. From a national economy point of view, for a country like Australia, always been very reliant on trade, very reliant on openness. There is a bit of a risk of overdoing it. I think the key thing for us is to respond rationally, respond cautiously to the challenges in relation to supply chains, not to fall victim to the fallacy that we can overcome all of those challenges by moving wholesale to domestic production, because we can't. It just wouldn't be an efficient or effective way of dealing with potential supply chain challenges. It's been an unfolding story that's been afoot for some time and probably have come to a fore around the same time as the COVID pandemic, but not necessarily related to it. So I think there have been a combination of forces that have forced businesses in Australia to think a little harder about their supply chain issues, some of which were known before, or some of which there were some hints perhaps before, but have come into starker relief since COVID.
We are absolutely, in a lot of areas, apart from resources, in a lot of areas we're a supply chain taker rather than a supply chain maker. And so we are a little bit vulnerable to what happens in the world and to some of the kind of downstream impacts that can see, delays, timeframes, go out from 6 weeks to 6 months, some of my members are telling me, in relation to some of those supply chain disruptions. Having said that, we've been remarkably resilient, and I think part of that is around the trading relationships that we've built up over time, and we've been able to shift, for example, in terms of some of our export markets, but also being able to quickly move in terms of some of our imports as well. And the government has come to the party. Things like the international airline freight mechanism were really important during the pandemic. But the biggest thing that we can do in terms of safeguarding our supply chains in future is diversifying our trade relationships, making sure that we've got multiple suppliers across multiple regions, and where necessary we might have local suppliers as well, but there's also vulnerabilities in terms of that.
The supply chain issues expose the need to keep working, even in a health crisis. Our nation had to adapt, and quickly. We were vulnerable, but we still had to get back to business.
Making sure staff work from home wherever possible.
If you can work from home, please do that.
Work where you cannot work from home or remotely.
If you can work from home, work from home.
There is an ability to work from home. This might be something that people consider at the moment.
And so, a new way of working was born.
The experience that we had during COVID accelerated the take-up of technology in a big way. That was most salient in respect of work from home, remote work, but wasn't confined to that. It was also true of distance education, the take-up of online commerce, the take-up of telehealth. And when you think about productivity over the long term, productivity is by far the big driver of the rise in living standards. About 90% of the rise in living standards over the last 6 decades has come from productivity growth, but it's slowed in recent years. Technology has been a key driver of productivity growth throughout history. And so the take-up of technology, particularly digital communications technology during COVID, does present us with a bit of an opportunity going forward as to how we might stimulate a bit of renewed productivity growth across the economy.
I'll be the first to admit that the virtual technologies that kept us connected throughout the pandemic worked far better than I certainly expected, and probably most people. They were amazing. But what they did was they kept us really well connected with our teams, but at the expense of connections across the organization. And so we had a little bit of a false sense of security about that, because we were more productive because we were working together with our teams much better. And when combined with working from home, we found that there could be, 2 days of working home each week can lead to a 5% productivity for the individual. But because the connections across the organization have diminished, that is impacting on organizations' ability to be innovative, to be creative, as well as it is impacting on culture and retention of employees. And that is actually having significant damage to the way that organizations work. So on the one hand, it's these technologies have been great for connectivity with our close colleagues, but at the expense of connections across the organization.
It's just accelerated everyone's use of digital and collaborative tools and learning to work hybrid. We had already been working with an international team, but it just meant everyone needed to work in that way. And I think the other big change for us was actually more opportunity driven. Everyone had to reach their customers in digital, like the customer wasn't in store, it was online. And so that actually created a really good opportunity for us to tap into and help those businesses. And so that just meant we had to move faster as well.
In many respects, you don't waste a good crisis, and it has actually allowed us and forced us to ask questions about the way that we worked in a way that we would never have previously. Before the pandemic, we were talking about the future of work. But really, that future is here and now. It's no longer a theoretical concept that might happen in 10 years or so. It is really brought to the forefront and is forcing us to look at not only how work is distributed across different locations, remote to the office, but it's also forcing us to ask questions: what is the purpose of the office in hybrid working, in new ways of working? And it's clear that the role of the office needs to change. The purpose needs to be much more strategically aligned to driving the mission of the organization, because you need value-creating activities.
Initially, it was used to keep people apart and stop the spread of a virus that we didn't know much about. But there was always an expectation it would end when the pandemic did. But the trend for working from home has well and truly stuck, especially for those industries where work has become more flexible. And it's clear that companies and workers see the advantages.
The biggest thing is, giving up the big offices that no one was going into and finding a different way of working. So we work through a lot of collaborative spaces, and then we rent event spaces for like big ideation days and celebration of wins. And a lot more of the way that we engage our employees and the way that we're working is now online. So that's probably one of the biggest shifts. I think it meant then that we were able to hire from anywhere. And so we had a number of our employees move into different locations, and we were also able to hire more from overseas and different states that we might not have otherwise, because we'd kind of leveled the ground in and worked out how to do that really effectively. And then I think we just put our eyes to global. So it actually accelerated our global expansion in terms of increasing our share of export revenues, because everyone was facing those same challenges. And as I said, that kind of ended up being an opportunity for us to tap into, to help them do digital marketing and get more for that increased spend, because everyone was spending, and it drove up competition and price and bigger shares of the way businesses were spending. And so, it accelerated everything very quickly for us.
The evidence on whether or not individuals are more or less productive when they work from home is mixed. There are surveys, there are studies that suggest that people are more productive. There are some that suggest that they're less productive. When people are asked, for the most part, people express a view that they are at least as productive at home as they are in the office. And for the most part, employers seem to concur with that. I think the main thing is that productivity is only part of the story. there's a big well-being effect to individuals having the flexibility, the option, the choice to be able to work from home. Firstly, in avoiding the commute, which for many people is significant. The average commute in Sydney now is over an hour if you take the total for the day, and that's a lot of time taken. The second benefit, of course, is the flexibility of being able to combine work with a range of other tasks, the ability to do a school drop-off or put on a load of washing between meetings. That offers very significant value to a large number of workers. So there's a big well-being effect there, and I think the productivity result overall will probably be neutral to a little bit positive. The thing we have to remember, of course, is that there are about 2/3 of workers in the Australian economy who can't work from home. Their jobs are not conducive to being able to do them remotely. They're frontline service workers. They have to be in the workplace in order to do their job. It's of the remaining third, many of them will not be working from home all of the time. So the productivity question is, how productive will they be on their first or second day working from home as distinct from in the office? And I think that's pretty manageable. It's likely that we will see the level of working from home rise from what it was in 2019, around 5% of the workforce on any given day working from home, to maybe something more like 12, 13, 15% on any given day. It's a big change, but it still leaves the central office as by far the dominant location of work. And I'm pretty confident that those extra 10 percentage points of workers or hours worked that are now being done from home are really being done by the people who are most suited, best equipped, whose bosses are quite happy for them to be working from home. And hence, I think the overall productivity story will be pretty balanced, if not positive.
The commute is absolutely a key factor in driving expectations around flexible working. Workers want to do less commuting. Now, less commuting is for two reasons. One, it frees up more time for other activities, but as you say, it also is a less of an economic burden on the worker. You know, the average cost of a commute across Australia on a daily basis is $25. And with inflation running at 8%, that's a lot of money for families. We have to also remember that people's time budgets and people's financial budgets have changed. You know, 2.5 years of remote working to all of a sudden find room in your budget at a time of rising living costs to, you know, fit in the cost of a commute is really a disincentive for coming back to work on a regular basis. So, but I think we need to transition and gradually move back to having time in the office as well as time working remotely, but certainly mindful of the cost pressures on families across the country.
And with COVID, many people have discovered that their lives are increasingly focused on health and well-being. More than ever, we've become aware of the importance of staying healthy. Research from Swinburne Edge and Deloitte recently found that workers rank well-being over salary as their highest priority when looking for a job.
This is extraordinary from my perspective. You know, I've been looking at this type of surveys over many years, and when you ask a worker what's the number one benefit that they expect to get from work, it's always number one is pay. But we have found, for the first time, is that well-being and pay are equal pegging. That's pretty astonishing, and it really goes to show that Australian workers are exhausted and that they see that flexible working is the route to enabling well-being. And so what we're finding is that, you know, you can't codify well-being into an employment contract, but you can flexible working. And so that we can actually do some comparative analysis in terms of what's the value of flexible working versus pay. And we're finding that 2 in 3 Australian workers are prepared to forego a pay rise. The median value is 10%, and in order to have flexible working arrangements. And in the context of the rising cost of living, we think that that's pretty remarkable.
There is an evolution at play right around the world. Where we work, the way we work, it's changing. And there's no doubt we'll take the learnings from the past few years with us, and as we move into the industries of the future.